I took the red-eye home just to share a quiet morning coffee with my wife. Instead, the HOA president decided to turn my porch into a setup scene straight out of a bad crime show. A Bluetooth speaker sat there like planted evidence, and a $500 fine accused me of blasting music. They thought a final notice and a few scared neighbors made them untouchable. But they didn't know my doorbell command a few friendly officers were about to expose the truth, giving me all the leverage I needed to erase the fine and spark a fraud investigation that could bring them down. But before we get there, let me know where you're watching from below, at 3:17 a.m. They said my house was shaking with noise. At 5:42, I was staring at bright orange duct tape stretched across my front door like a crime scene tag. House number 2217 in what was supposed to be the quiet corner of Lewin County. I'm Lucas Carson, 58 and 4, 30 of those years. I've made a living fixing other people's computer chaos, a digital janitor. My whole career's been about spotting what's out of place, and that tape definitely didn't belong there. The red eye from San Francisco had landed on time, which was a small miracle. My Uber ride home was a blur of empty streets and sleeping houses, the kind of silence that hums. All I wanted was my own bed and maybe a mug of my wife Judy's coffee, brewed strong enough to wake the dead. Instead, I was standing on my own porch, staring at an orange declaration of war. Pinned under the tape was a letter. Official and over-designed, stamped with the Lewin County Homeowners Association logo. The top line, written in an overly fancy font, read, "Final Notice." Funny I'd never received a first one. I peeled the tape carefully, not wanting to chip the paint. Judy says my need to keep things pristine borders on obsession. I call it respecting what's mine. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind you use when you want bad news to feel important. And the bad news was clear. $500 fine. For what? Severe noise violation. My eyes moved down the page. The alleged offense occurred at exactly 3:17 a.m. I blinked. 3:17? A cold IT habit. My flight, United 451, was cruising at 30,000 feet above Nebraska at that time. I remembered because the pilot had just announced it and I'd glanced at my watch. A meticulous boarding pass in my wallet. Confirmation email saved, receipts archived. So what kind of noise could I have made mid-air? I chuckled to myself. Maybe my snoring broke the sound barrier. Guess my in-flight playlist was a little too loud, I muttered. Next time I'll remember to use headphones when I fly over my own house. The front door creaked open. Judy stood there in her robe, short gray hair, perfectly in place, even at this ungodly hour, a mug of coffee in one hand. She didn't look shocked, just mildly amused. That's Judy.com as a monk. If the house were on fire, she'd check if the marshmallows were toasted before calling the fire department. Her humor's dry, razor sharp. She knows exactly when to slice and when to soothe. Well, that's new, she said evenly, nodding toward the letter. Did you bring your rock band home with you on the plane? I grinned. Nah, more of a smooth jazz trio. I stepped inside, handed her the notice. $500, Jude. For a noise violation at 3 in the morning? She sipped her coffee, eyes flicking across the page, expression steady. Then she said, flat and certain, Karen Jennings. Not a question, a diagnosis. Karen Jennings, HOA president, self-appointed, queen of the cul-de-sac, sworn enemy of joy, laughter, and anything resembling an overgrown rosebush. She carried her clipboard like a royal decree and had a talent for finding problems no one else could see. We'd had our run-ins before garbage cans out 10 minutes early, a note about our welcome mat not being earth tone compliant, petty stuff. But this was different. Bushes. She was bossy, obsessed with appearances, and carried that clipboard like it was a royal scepter. We'd had a few run-ins before, warning about garbage cans being out 10 minutes early, a passive-aggressive note about our welcome mat not being in the approved earth tone palette. Petty stuff. But this wasn't petty. This was a declaration of war. I was on a plane, Judy, I said, heat rising in my chest. I have proof. I have receipts, I know, she replied, handing me her mug. I figured as much. She had that expression that told me she was already 3 steps ahead. So what's the plan, Lucas? I took a slow sip of the coffee. It burned going down, but it was the good kind of burn. The kind that wakes up the part of you that's tired of being pushed around. My old IT instincts clicked back into place. When you have a problem, I said, thinking out loud, you don't whine about it. You gather data. You trace the source. You run diagnostics. Judy smirked. She knew that look. The gears were turning. First things first, I said, the corner of my mouth lifting. Let's see what our digital witness has to say. I nodded toward the doorbell camera. A simple little gadget, but with a high-def lens and motion detection that caught everything. It had already saved a few Amazon packages from porch pirates and kept overzealous cookie-selling scouts in check. Now, it was about to become Exhibit A. The game was officially on, and I had a feeling our beloved HOA president had just made a very, very expensive mistake. We headed into my office, my so-called command center. It was small, cluttered, but sacred. The air smelled faintly of solder and old coffee. Shelves of neatly coiled cables and retired hard drives lined the walls, while 3 monitors cast a soft blue glow across the room. Judy took her usual seat beside me, her coffee mug leaving a perfect ring on the coaster I made everyone use. She didn't say much, but her presence was steady, a calm anchored to my storm. This was our ritual. I handled the digital forensics. She handled reality. Together, we balanced logic and instinct. I pulled up the security camera's web portal. The familiar blue and white interface flickered onto the screen. All right, I muttered, more to myself than her. Let's scroll back. The timeline appeared at the bottom thin bar, little blue markers for each motion event. The usual suspects popped up. The mailman at 2 p.m. yesterday, a cat slinking across the lawn near midnight, a raccoon nosing around the garbage cans just before dawn. Investigating our trash cans at 2:30 a.m., I kept scrolling back, eyes locked on the timeline. Then I saw a clip starting at 3:05 a.m. Bingo, I whispered. I clicked play. The screen came alive, washed in that eerie green tint of night vision. The image was crystal clear, our driveway, Judy's perfectly trimmed hedges, the porch light spilling a soft halo across the steps. And then a shadow peeled itself from the darkness. Someone was walking down the street with the kind of determined, power walk stride that said, I have a mission. Tracksuit, reflective stripes. As the figure stepped closer, my stomach dropped. Even in grainy monochrome, that carefully coiffed helmet of blonde hair was unmistakable. Karen Jennings, would you look at that? Judy muttered, her voice dripping with dry sarcasm. An early morning jogger, so devoted to community health, Karen wasn't out for cardio. She was carrying something large, black, rectangular. She darted up our driveway, glancing around like a cartoon villain who'd skipped stealth training. She crouched by the azalea bush beneath the living room window, fiddled with the object for a few seconds. A Bluetooth speaker, a big one. It's the kind teenagers blast at skate parks to prove they hate everyone's eardrums. She pulled out her phone, screen lighting her face. A second later, the speaker roared to life, even through the tiny doorbell mic. The sound was chaos, like someone threw a bag of angry cats into a blender with a pile of cymbals. Heavy metal. At full volume, then just as suddenly, Karen turned, speed walking away into the darkness. The video ended. For a long moment, Judy and I just stared at the screen. The sheer nerve of it was almost impressive. She hadn't just lied, she'd fabricated evidence, trespassed on our property, planted a speaker, and faked a noise complaint. Well, I said finally, leaning back, that's thorough. Judy sipped her coffee. The woman's got commitment. I'll give her that. I scrolled again. Another clip blinked on the timeline. 3:21 a.m., I clicked a police cruiser. Rolled slowly to a stop in front of our house, red and blue lights washing over the lawn. An officer stepped out, looked around, then the noise abruptly cut off. The clip ended. This wasn't random. It was planned. Deliberate. Stupidly deliberate. The next morning, armed with the video on my phone, I went hunting for Karen. I found her crouched on her lawn, adjusting a sprinkler head with surgical precision. The grass was unnaturally green, probably, because she watered it like she was trying to grow emeralds. She wore a crisp pink blazer and a look of divine authority. as if sprinkler symmetry were a sacred duty. I approached, keeping my expression neutral. "Morning, Karen." She looked up. For half a second, panic flashed across her eyes before she smoothed it into her usual smug composure. "Lucas," she said tightly, "is there a problem?" "Funny you should ask," I said, pulling out my phone. "I was reviewing some security footage from last night. Because of that little noise violation, I found something interesting you might want to see." I tapped play. The night vision footage filled the screen, her sneaking onto my porch, setting the speaker, then scurrying off. She froze. Her face, usually so smugly composed, went blank. The color drained out. Even the sprinkler seemed to stop mid-arc, as if it too was stunned. It was the exact look a predator gives when it realizes the trap just closed on them. She stammered, eyes wide. That's not me. That video is doctored, it's fake. You tech people, you think you're so clever with your little tricks." I didn't say a word, just let it loop. Her planting the speaker, her fleeing, her caught red-handed. Finally, she tore her eyes away, fury breaking through her cracked composure. "I have nothing more to say to you," she snapped, spinning on her heel and storming back to her front door. My next stop was the Lewin County Police Department. A small, tidy brick building that smelled faintly of disinfectant and cheap coffee. I told them everything. The fine, my alibi, the video. A young officer with kind eyes and a NAMA tag that read Miller led me into a small interview room. I played the footage for him, watched eyebrows lifting higher with each second. "Wow," he said finally, shaking his head. "Just wow." Then his brow furrowed, like something had clicked. "Wait a second. 3:17 a.m.? He glanced up. "I took that call." My ears perked up. "You did?" Stormed down the walkway, her heels clacking like angry punctuation marks. The Bobs followed a few steps behind, trying not to make eye contact, their bravado deflating with every step. Judy leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Watching them retreat with the calm satisfaction of someone who just won a silent war. "You have a great day too, Karen," she called after them, her tone chipper enough to curdle milk. The door shut with a satisfying click. When I came home later and heard the story, I nearly dropped my bag laughing. The mental image of Corin clipboard in hand, flanked by her 2 HOA henchmen being verbally eviscerated on camera by my wife, was pure gold. "You recorded the whole thing?" I asked between laughs. Judy nodded, scrolling through her phone. "Crystal clear audio," she said proudly. "Even got the part where she threatened to note it in my file. I'm thinking of framing that quote, that night." I uploaded all the footage, Karen planting the speaker, Officer Miller's Bodycam clip, and Judy's doorstep show down to a neatly organized folder. Then I sent it to both the HOA board and our lawyer. 2 days later, word spread like wildfire through Maplewood Heights. Neighbors whispered. Group chats exploded. And for the first time in recorded history, Karen Jennings wasn't holding court at the weekly HOA meeting. She'd taken a personal leave of absence. By the end of the week, an official letter arrived. The fine was voided, the complaint erased, and a formal apology issued signed by the interim HOA vice president. But the best part came later that evening, when I spotted Karen's for sale sign going up in her perfectly manicured front yard. Judy stood beside me on the porch, coffee in hand, a satisfied smile on her face. "Think she blamed the noise ordinance?" she asked. I chuckled. "Nah," I said, watching the real estate agent hammer the sign into the ground. "She can't stand living somewhere where everyone knows what she did." Judy raised her mug in a mock toast. "To neighborhood peace," she said. I clinked my can of soda against it. For the first time in months, it really did feel peaceful. No false complaints, no midnight chaos, no HOA drama. Just the quiet hum of sprinklers, the chirping of crickets, and the sweet sound of Karen packing up her empire of nonsense for good. Asterisk. Listed owner was Karen Jennings. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, the cursor blinking back at me like it knew exactly how insane this was. She wasn't just abusing her position. She had built an entire fake company to funnel HOA money directly to herself. The fines, the inspections, the intimidation, it all lead right here. Every $25 ticket, every bogus citation. Every community enforcement charge was going straight into her pocket. "Judy," I said slowly, turning the laptop so she could see. Her eyes widened as she read the name. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered. "She's paying herself?" I nodded, my pulse pounding. "And she's been doing it for over a year." Numbers were staggering. 12 months of $2,000 payments meant at least $24,000 skimmed. Right out of our community's funds, and that was just what was on record. Who knew how much more she'd siphoned through bogus fines and consulting fees? I opened another tab and cross-referenced the HOA's financial reports with the payment schedule. The patterns lined up perfectly. Each month's HOA dues withdrawal matched a consulting payment made to Luan Compliance Solutions a few days later. It was like watching a magician's trick played in reverse, the illusion falling apart with every click. Judy leaned closer, her voice low. "So what now?" "We can't exactly storm her house with pitchforks," I grinned. "No, but we can hand her over to people who have badges." The next morning, I compiled everything the fake finds. The videos, Officer Miller's report, the company records, and screenshots of the financial transactions into a neat, labeled digital dossier. I even printed hard copies, because nothing makes a fraud case sing like a 3-ring binder full of undeniable proof. Then, sent the entire package to 3 places: the HOA board, the Lewin County District Attorney's Office, and, for good measure, the local news station's investigative tip line. By that afternoon, the neighborhood was buzzing. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Karen didn't show. Word spread that her email had gone dark, her phone disconnected. Someone said they saw a moving truck outside her house, and by the end of the day, the Queen of Maplewood Heights was gone. Vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but her dying rose bushes and a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading straight to her fake company. A week later, I got a call from Officer Miller. His tone was practically gleeful. "You'll want to check the local paper," he said. Front page. Headline read, "HOA President Accused of Embezzlement Funds Traced to Fake Company." Judy framed the article and hung it on the wall above my desk, right next to my Karen Files folder. Beneath it, she taped a sticky note that read, "Proof beats power." For the first time in a long time, Maplewood Heights was quiet again. The lawns still looked perfect, the sprinklers still hissed, and somewhere in the distance, that same squirrel was probably still plotting to steal someone's pie. But this time, peace didn't feel fake. It felt earned. Name legally attached to the company, Karen Jennings. I leaned back and let out a long, slow whistle. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I said, a grin spreading across my face. Judy scooted closer. "What is it?" "I found it, Jude," I said, pointing at the screen. "I found the grift. She'll find us. Paid her own shell for compliance, then paid herself again. Alou Power money, her pockets." "Of course she was," Judy said, as calm as ever. "People like that aren't vicious for free. There's always a price tag." Her flat assessment was like cold water clearing the last of my doubts. This was real. This was happening. I needed someone who spoke numbers for a living. I called my brother-in-law, Uncle Dan, retired forensic accountant, part-time fisherman, full-time curmudgeon, with a mind like a steel trap. "Hey, Uncle Dan," I said when he answered. "Hypothetical question. Hypothetically, if an HOA president were authorizing payments from the HOA to a company she secretly owned, is that a problem?" There was a beat of silence, then a low chuckle. "Hypothetical, huh? Frowny face situation?" Dan's chuckle got sharper. "Frowny face, Lucas? Son, that's not a frowny face. That's a go-to-jail face. Conflict of interest, wire fraud risk, straight embezzlement if the paper trail checks out." His tone turned serious. "Be careful. People who do this don't like getting caught." He was right. This wasn't just petty power tripping. It was greed. Karen Jennings wasn't a bored busybody. She was a small-time thief with a scheme. We had the what, the why, and the how. To convince the neighborhood, though, we needed a simple, undeniable narrative visual dots that connected cleanly, and we needed to be careful. A cornered person like Karen could get dangerous. While I built the case, Judy suggested we do something small and public to remind Karen we weren't afraid. Nothing illegal, just a little suburban payback. Karen was a creature of habit. Every morning at 8:15 she did her neighborhood patrol, clipboard in hand, marching past our house like she owned the pavement. Our sprinkler system was smart app controlled, precise and perfect for mischief that could be blamed on a faulty head. The next morning we sat at the window like suburban spies, coffee in hand. At 8:14 I opened the sprinkler app. At 8:15, just as predicted, Karen marched into view, pristine in a white blazer, hair immaculate, jaw set in disdain, her eyes flicked. To our lawn with that look that says you're beneath me? I smiled, tapped one button, and the nozzle in zone 4 came alive. It wasn't the polite mist you might expect. It was a focused jet that hit her squarely from the waist down. She let out a strangled shrieky quell, parts indignation and disbelief while her white blazer plastered itself to her like a soggy flag. Water dripped from her hair. She stood there sputtering, furious and exposed. She knew it was us, of course. But how do you prove an app did it? To anyone watching, it could have been a malfunction. Judy sipped her coffee and said, deadpan, "There's a 100% chance of righteous indignation this morning." It was petty, perfect, and utterly satisfying. A few days later, Karen escalated predictably by installing a shiny new security camera on a pole aimed directly at our front door. Intimidation? Plain and simple. Judy peered through the binoculars and rolled her eyes. "Creepy," she said, then paused with a grin. "I have an idea." That afternoon, we went to the garden store and bought a dozen gnomes, classic pointy hats, beards and all. After dark, we arranged them on our lawn in the direct line of sight of Karen's camera. We set them in 2 neat rows, 2 by 6, like a miniature jury box. Each gnome faced the camera as if sworn to bear witness. Around their feet we placed a small cardboard placard that read, in perfect, ridiculous font, "We have seen everything." It was ridiculous. It was theatrical. It was harmless. And it was glorious. We sat inside and watched Karen's camera for the next few days, knowing the image of a dozen gnomes staring back at her surveillance would be impossible for her to spin into menace. The message was simple. We were watching back.